Hello, this is Henry Harris, and welcome to the Weekly Spark. A central theme of the week's portion is the subject of machlokas, the Hebrew word for dispute. I want to talk about the discussion of machlokas, of dispute, because to me it's fascinating. I find that it really is a theme that I just experience ongoingly in my life, in my relationships, that the relationships that are most important to me, the things that most matter to me. The notion of dispute and disagreement is kind of always there. And I want to talk in particular about an insight that I see in the word itself. The word machlokas, the Hebrew word for dispute, it has what's called a shorish, a root word. And the root of that word is chelik. Chelik is the root of the word machlokas. And the Hebrew word chelik means part. And the idea here, as I see it, is that the essence of dispute, the essence of the whole phenomenon of dispute is that people live in what we might call a partial worldview. And it reminds me of the story of the four blind guys that come upon an elephant, and one guy's banging his hands up against the side of the elephant, and he's saying, "Oh, it's a wall," and another guy's grabbing onto the tail, and he's saying, "It's a whip," and etc. And I think you get the point. And it's fascinating because on some level they're seeing and experiencing a reality. It's just that they're only experiencing a partial view of the reality. Now, what's tricky and fascinating about this whole thing is that inside the partial worldview, it doesn't look like a partial worldview. It just looks like reality, which can, of course, make things kind of tricky and interesting. So the sages come forward in the Ethics of the Fathers, and they talk about dispute, and they basically say the following. They say there's really kind of two modes of experience for human beings in regards to dispute. There's disputes for the sake of heaven, which is to say that the parties are really interested in truth. And then there's disputes that are not for the sake of heaven, which means like they're kind of interested in their own, ego projection kind of thing. And first of all, I'm fascinated by this idea that it doesn't really give a third alternative. It means to say to me that it's kind of like the human experience means disputes. That's just how it works. Because we are living in our own perspective, which is by definition a partial worldview, we're going to experience bumping up against people. The question then becomes, how do we navigate it in a way that it becomes an asset? One is just my understanding that human beings by nature live in a partial worldview. It means I can know about myself that I'm kind of handicapped going in, even though I don't always see that I'm handicapped, I kind of know it. And it makes sense to me. Two is the example that the Mishnah, the example that the sages give of an ideal dispute, is a dispute between the sages Hillel and Shammai. And in particular, what was noteworthy about that dispute was that, for example, Hillel was very careful to consider and he was able to repeat the perspective of his arguer Shammai even before he made his own opinion. To me, that's a powerful thing, that there is an ability to be respectful and considerate as I'm in a disagreement, which to me means to say, look for the quality of the interaction, look for the feeling that you're experiencing in your dispute, and it'll help you notice where you're holding in terms of your awareness of the partial worldview quality. It'll clue you in. I just recently had the experience of being in kind of it wasn't a yelling match, but it was a sort of dispute with my wife in which we were discussing an upcoming trip, and she's got all these plans to kind of deal with all these contingencies, and I find myself getting annoyed at her. And my message to her, with spoken and unspoken, was, it's why do you have to try and control everything? Like, that life is going to happen, and you can't get bent out of shape by things not going as you prefer, right? So of course she felt my annoyance, and it wasn't pleasant for her, and she she pointed it out to me, and then it dawned on me that I'm telling her, hey, by the way, point of wisdom to realize you don't get bent out of shape by things not going your way, because that's not wisdom, right? But what am I doing as I'm giving her this message? I'm experiencing annoyance at her going about things in a way that's not to my liking. And that moment, it just kind of like, it resurfaced the humanness of living in a partial worldview. And that's really the point, that the nature of human experience is that disputes are par. How will we experience and relate to the phenomenon of dispute? Be accepting, and notice your own role. Notice your feeling in the process. It'll give you information about how well you're doing and whether you want to kind of proceed with the dispute or maybe kind of step back.